Crowd for our presentation today, so we're just grabbing a few more chairs. So good morning again. My name is Cruz, a member of Dignity Chicago, and I'm happy to welcome you to this session today. Rompe, tela, deste, dulce, encuentro. Mysticism, human persons, and God's queer love. So today I have the pleasure and the honor to introduce our speaker and speakers, Dr. Miguel Diaz. Dr. Díaz is the John Courtney Murray University Chair in Public Service at Loyola University Chicago. He has served under President Barack Obama as the 9th U.S. Ambassador to the Holy See. So this may be a first. We've never had an ambassador at a Dignity conference.
Hopefully it won't be the last.
Yes. He is also the author and the third book in this series, Queer God de Amor. As a public theologian, I'm sorry, I skipped something here. He's the editor of the new series, Disruptive Cartographers Doing Theology Latinamente. The series opened in 2021 with his edited volume titled, The World Became Culture. He is also the author of the third book in this series, Queer God de Amor. As a public theologian, Professor Díaz regularly engages print, radio, and television media. He also contributes to writing a column for the National Catholic Reporter titled Theology a la Plaza. As part of his ongoing commitment to advance human rights globally, he participates in a number of diplomatic initiatives in Washington, D.C., including being a member of the Atlantic Council and a member of the Ambassador Circle at the National Democratic Institute. He's joined today with Zachary Haney, who is a doctoral candidate in queer theology, and will share in the presentation and the dialogue and all that, so welcome. Yeah, it's great to have you with us. So just very quickly, some housekeeping things. We're still asking that people keep their masks on during the session. We will be recording the session, but we will stop the recording during the Q&A, so that will provide a more comfortable space for you to share and be engaged in that part of the session. Towards the end of the session, then we're really focused on timeliness, because we know the lunch is going to be at 12:15. So anyway, it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers, and please engage and enjoy the presentation.
Thank you all for welcoming us this weekend, this morning. We're very excited to be here. This is, I think, your first DignityUSA conference, right? Second. My first conference. So I'm very happy to be here with all of you. So we'll just, I guess, get started. And we're going to do this as a bit of a dialogue, but we also want to encourage all of you to engage in that dialogue as well. So as we progress through the next hour, feel free to raise your hand, stop us if something strikes your interest, if a question comes up. We'll also have some time toward the end for a bit of a Q&A as well. So, sound good?
Sounds great.
Okay. Well, we know that, or some of us might know that there was a bit of drama over the past month with this new book, Queer God de Amor, but it's been picked up by a new publisher. Can you give us a little information about that?
So first of all, let me just express my gratitude for being here with all of you, to Marianne Duddy, to the entire team, for this opportunity and safe space to be able to talk among friends about something that I find very passionate. I've always been passionate about theology, and those that know me know that's been the case. The past 8 years in my life have been very, very difficult, and I decided and made the decision that I would devote my energies, having lost heteronormative privilege, to commit my brains and my experiences to try to do a little bit on behalf of our queer communities. And so this book is part of that, the fruits of that effort. And I'm not going to say too much, except to say that, that on June 9th, I received an email notification from the Catholic Foreign Mission Society of America Marino, stating that it had determined that it would not approve the publication of my work. The notification served to terminate my publication agreement with Orbis Books, dated back to July 10th, 2020, and no reasons were provided for this decision, nor was any process identified for coming to this determination. That statement was posted in UA's ministry. I am happy to announce that as of a few minutes ago, this public announcement will go out. Fordham University Press acquires Queer God de Amor by Latino theologian Miguel Díaz. The book is part of the Disruptive Cartographers doing Theology Latinamente, which will be moving to Fordham University Press from Orbis Books with this volume. The previous volumes include The Word Became Culture, which opened the series, and Revelation in the Vernacular, which has now won several awards by Catholic presses. And then Fordham University Press has issued the following quote. Fordham University Press is excited to have acquired Queer God de Amor by Miguel Díaz and to have secured the rights to publish the Disruptive Cartographers doing Theology Latinamente series, of which it is part. The book and series are a perfect fit with our catalog and contribute to our mission of publishing boundary-breaking scholarship and supporting underrepresented voices. We welcome Dr. Díaz, together with his co-editors Carmen Nanco Fernandez and Gary Riviestea, SVD, to the Florida University Press community of authors, and look forward to a successful and long-lasting collaboration. Among us is a professor from Fordham University Press, but I should say, I should say, Brian, that and a friend, a longtime friend. It stays in the family of Jesuits, and so anyway, needless to say, it has been a very difficult time for me in the past few weeks, but in so many ways. As a result of the generosity of so many good people, I think grace has prevailed in this case at this moment. So thank you for your support. So we can comment on the book.
We should
Yes.
get into the book.
Yes.
All right. So the series subtitle, I guess, is Doing Theology Latinamente, and I think that arises out of, or at least it appears to me that it arises out of a question that you bring up in your introduction to the book. You say, at the 1995 annual meeting for the Academy of Catholic Hispanic Theologians of the United States in New York, I raised the following question. What would Catholic systematics look like if it were done Latinamente? And so, what would? I want you to answer that question now. What would systematics look like if done Latinamente? How do you think this book reaches toward or accomplishes that task in different ways? And what is the goal of doing theology in this way?
So the book that Zach is referring to, or the question that gave rise to the book back then, From the Heart of Our People, published by Orbis Press, was that question of, at that point, my mentor, she was still alive, Catherine Mallory Lacuna, had published a book on feminist theology from systematic perspectives, and I had drawn the inspiration to think about the possibilities of doing Theology Latinamente. So I was in a group. It was actually my first ACTUS meeting of the Academy of Catholic Hispanic Theologians of the United States, and I raised the question, what would Catholic systematics look like if we were done Latinamente? That question, led to the publication of this first book, Anthology in Catholic Systematics from a Latinx Perspective. And so the series that we have now launched, this Disruptive Cartographers series, in which the first two books were published by Orbis, and now beginning with the third book, they will come over to Fordham University Press. The series is a groundbreaking series that does not seek to do everything in Latino theology that has been done, or it's going to be done, or is being done by other theologians, But the series is intended to do three things, and each of the volumes so far, and certainly we'll talk more about Queer God de Amor does this. The one thing that the series is supposed to do, the first thing is it's retrieving. It's a retrieval of a primarily. Many of us are retrieving Iberian sources, and so we're going back to the roots of some of the Spanish theologians, also in Latin America, but there's this attempt to retrieve some of these Iberian sources, and in my case I'm retrieving Juan de la Cruz, right? Jean-Pierre's second book engages a number of retrievals, but De Leon is one of the ones that he retrieves. But again, the series is intended to retrieve a source, as an Iberian source. The second thing is that the series is supposed to retrieve that, or is retrieving that from the lens, from the perspective of a Latinx theologian, right? And so retrieval of an ancient source, or whether it's ancient, medieval, something rooted in the Iberian Latin American tradition, to look at that source, to reinterpret that source through the lens, through the eyes of a Latinx theologian. And then the third thing, which is very important, is that we're not just doing this as an exercise of the mind, but also rooted in this lo cotidiano, what we call in Latino theology, lo cotidiano, the daily life experiences, and raising the question, ¿y qué? So what about this retrieval? Why should people care? Why is this an important exercise of theology when it comes to doing this retrieval? And so in my book, as I just mentioned, I retrieved the theology, the mysticism of John of the Cross, and in particular the trinitarian theology of John of the Cross. And again, this is you'll have a chance to, if you don't have it yet, get a summary. But basically, in Queer God de Amor, I explore the mystery of God in the relationship between divine and human persons by turning to the writings of San Juan de la Cruz. One's mystical theology highlights the notion of God as lover and God's erotic-like relationship with human persons. And then in critical conversations with contemporary queer theologians, I retrieve from Juan a preferential option for human sexuality as an experience in daily life, there's lo cotidiano, that is rich with possibilities for resourcing and imagining the Christian doctrine of God. By engaging Juan de la Cruz through queer Latinx eyes, I out God from heteronormative closets and restore human sexuality as a source for theology. This outing of divine queerness, that is, the ineffability of divine life, aligns reflections on the mystery of God with the faith experiences of queer Catholics and continues the objective of the series to disrupt the cartography of Theology Latinamente. So the idea is to really provide an alternative theological vision, but one that is thoroughly rooted in one of the in the Catholic analogical sacramental imagination.
Obviously the book is rooted in the work of John of the Cross, the mysticism of John of the Cross. Why did you choose to go with John of the Cross as your focus, as your foundation, and especially given the colonial history of Spain in Latin America? Why was John of the Cross significant for you?
Yeah, so the first is personal, right? And so while I had known the writings of John of the Cross for many years, the last 8 years have been difficult years for me, and difficult, and also the awareness of an aspect of my own humanity as well as the humanity of others that I've been privileged to accompany. In many ways, drew me to the mystic, to the Spanish mystic. And so when we started conceiving this series, I knew that I wanted to work on the theme of God, the doctrine of God, because those were the reasons why I went to Notre Dame. and why I worked under the mentorship of Catherine Lacuna. For those of you that may or may not know, Catherine Lacuna had written a book, God for Us, The Trinity in Christian Life. She's, I consider her one of my biggest mentors, and she's quoted many times in this book. And so the personal dimension of Juan de la Cruz, plus the cultural dimension, drew me. But I also discovered in the process of research that there are some aspects to John of the Cross's writings, and especially reading him in Spanish, that made sense, and that not only of what I was personally experiencing, but in terms of addressing this lacunae, this missing piece, oftentimes missing piece in both within Latinx theology as well as within the broader Catholic theological tradition, which is, in that missing piece, is the attention to the body in the bedroom, the attention to human sexuality, in particular queer sexuality. And I discovered that there's a piece of Juan wrote many poems, and 3 of these poems really were the foundation for his commentaries. Most people know Juan de la Cruz by his poem Noche Oscura, the Dark Night. But I discovered this other poem that is thoroughly trinitarian, and also has this kind of like juiciness and erotic-like nature, and that's O Llama de Amor Viva. I'll read it to you at the end. And the Trinitarian dimension of that poem and of his commentary has already been noted. What has not been noted is this kind of sexual fluidity and richness in the Spanish language that can be tapped into with respect to epistemology, how we come to know God and one another. And so, so it seemed like, I don't know, maybe the mystic is channeling in the midst of all this, in many ways, his presence during this time. And I have had the privilege now of praying at the tomb of John, the Cross's tomb in Segovia now for a number of times, and just just asking for the living flame that he speaks about. The living flame is the Holy Spirit. The living flame, the presence of the Spirit in my life, and also in the lives of so many around this room, in the lives of others that have accompanied, in ways that can discern and speak about the mystery of God in our daily lives and in our humanity. And so that's a little bit about how I was drawn to John of the Cross. I mean, the other thing that I will say is that the other piece about this O Llama de Amor Viva, living flame of love, that I find attractive is that many times the mystic is known, mystics in general, but John of the Cross certainly is known for his apophatic theology, right? So the theology of negation, right? Think of a sculptor who chisels away, and then you get closer and closer to who, to what the sculptor wants to achieve by the chiseling away of the stone. And so there's this kind of like the theology of negation, which is very much common to the mystics. But one of the things that this piece brings about, and why it drew me, is that there's an apophatic dimension in this living flame of love. It's really the affirmation of God's presence in mystical union, and the language that he uses is so beautifully erotic. And so that was, and like I said, fluid. And so that drew me to want to underscore a different aspect of Juan of the Cross's mysticism.
You mentioned the Trinity, and then you just followed up now with this apophatic theology. And so, while reading through this introduction, one of the lines that stood out to me was that the goal, I guess, one of the goals of this book is to invite, you say, It'll invite the reader to reconsider God as the queer God de Amor and the sexual union and relationships of queer persons as vestiges of the Trinity. Can you say a little more about what you mean by vestige? Why not fullness of image?
So the term vestige comes up many times within the field of Christian theological approaches. Certainly, Augustine and others were many attempts to speak about how do human beings image. How are we created in the image and likeness of God, right? And so we can speak about the traces, the signs. We can speak about the ways upon which God has, because as creator, the artist has left, the markings on the created realities, right? And so I use the term vestige in that sense, but what I do is to say that it's not like our humanity has all of these aspects, but one of these is not a vestige, right? And it's not like queer humanity lies outside of that possibility. And so if we're going to be true to the Catholic analogical imagination, I argue we have to take the whole of it, take our whole bodies, our embodiment, who we are as human beings in this great richness and diversity, and take that teaching that is very ancient to task, and say that queer bodies are also in the image of God, and therefore this is also a queer God. Similar to what others have done, Elizabeth Johnson's in her classic She Who Is, for instance. This is an effort to, in a particular way, ground that tradition and speak about the mystery of God from the perspective of the queer subject, the queer sexual subject and queer sexuality. Now, to your question, why isn't it just, well, here both the Catholic tradition and John the mystic invite me to say that no human experience, and by that I also mean queer sexuality and our queer experiences, no human experience, whether it comes from a cultural, racial, sexual, gender perspective, should ever be elevated to the point where it becomes God, right? And that's that kind of like the apophatic dimension, right? There is a beautiful cataphatic dimension which invites us to the mystery, which invites us, to name the mystery of God. But I love one of the Cross's poems, which becomes the central subject of my first chapter in Explorations of God Talk. When Juan de la Cruz refers in one of his poems to God as un no sé qué, and continues to use that phrase throughout the poem, right? God is this, well, I'm not sure, I can't, the minute that I say God is this, then I have felt that un no sé qué, that I don't know, because I have, that's the kind of like the idolatry piece that we all are tempted. And so that's why I continue to use even like, erotic like or vestige, because I want to ground God in creatureliness, the mystery of God in our experiences of the world, including our queer humanity, but I don't want to reduce God to those experiences. I want to be able to say that, yes, we too are capable of missing the mark. We too are capable of sin. We too are capable of all those things that any other person is capable of, but we're also not less than capable of imaging the mystery of God. And so that crave for balance between, I suppose from a mystical perspective, you would say the apophatic and the cataphatic, from the Catholic analogical broader imagination is that similarity in difference is what we call the fancy term, that whereby we want to affirm a similarity, but we also want to say that Creator remains distinct from, not separate, but distinct from who we are as creatures, who we are as human beings. So.
You just said that you want to open up all of the human experience, the human body, our interactions perhaps. And so toward the end of this this introduction, you write that it helps address, your work here helps address your personal, as you say, lucha, your personal struggle. And you referred to some of that a few minutes ago as well. deeply personal question, moving into the personal, right? How do you see this work helping you work through some of that struggle that you've encountered over the past 8 years especially?
So, towards the end of the introduction to the book, I write the following. This book was birthed from, and I speak about la lucha. This is a term in Latinx theologies. It's in fact very much attributed to the late Ana María Díaz. Ana María Díaz oftentimes spoke about the daily struggle, right, la lucha. And this has become a term that is oftentimes classic in Latinx approaches. And so our daily struggles against oppression, our daily struggles, la lucha is, oftentimes, in fact, you ask a Latinx person, so how are you doing? And the Latino person may ask, ¿Cómo estás? And the Latino person, the Latinx person may respond, ahí, en la lucha, there, in the struggle, So it expresses a kind of vision of life, that life is an ongoing struggle, it's an ongoing effort to make it better, to change the things they are, to transform the things they are, to make a difference. And so this book was birthed from my personal struggle and from the experience of standing in solidarity with the struggles of numerous queer persons whom I've had the privilege to meet and accompany since I started the process of coming out to myself, family, and friends. Coming out is not always as liberating as it's oftentimes assumed to be, as anyone who has accompanied LGBTQ+ persons, and in particular brown and black queer bodies, knows. Cultural realities connected to my Cuban background and to my Catholic faith obstructed my journey of self-discovery and self-transparency. And as is the case for many queer persons, coming out involves an ongoing wrestling with angels to reject powers and principalities that stand in the way of human flourishing and our ability to know and unite with God and neighbor. And so the personal, my own personal journey, as well as the privilege of accompanying others in the past 8 years or so, and then all the challenges that I've had to deal with at the personal, familial, professional, institutional, kinds of different intertwining realities. It's also part of the story, and it's also part of why I wrote this book, and why I hope it can contribute in whatever ways it can to opening up some spaces for conversation.
I guess how do you envision or what would you like to see as the impact on the lives of LGBTQ+ people who read this work? Where do you envision it going?
That's a difficult question, right? And I think that each person who reads this the book and each of the chapters may speak, to those around and those of us here in this room and others outside this room in different ways. I hope that part of the function of the book is that it is primarily a theological work, and it is intended to affirm that the Christian theological imagination has plenty of room and plenty of space for serious reflection that brings together some of the central teachings of our faith with queer humanity. The second thing is that it's already doing some good work, because I have to just say that Zach Haney is, I'm so privileged to say, he is one of, certainly my first openly queer Catholic doctoral student who is pursuing studies in queer theology. And my good friend Brian and Craig know that some years ago we sat there thinking, if we could bring together a group of queer Catholic theologians, and we couldn't come up with, we couldn't come up with a handful right, Ryan? And it's like, and here at the last Actus meeting, at the last CTSA meeting, there's already a group of visibly queer Catholic theologians, not only holding PhDs, but on their way to holding one. And so, whatever those of us who are in the academy can do to begin to open up some doors, so that they can continue, in the work that has already begun, but multiply it and magnify it, so that one day, to hear of the word queer in God is like, well, whatever. This is like already old news. Whatever can be done in that, I think is a step forward in terms of what I call in the book the Catholicity, the Catholicity with a little c, right? The inclusivity, the ability of God to be named from a wide range, from a rainbow of perspectives.
I guess another question I have. We've brought up the book is literally called The Queer God de Amor, right? The Queer God is another book, but the word queer is a word that I think for a lot of people holds a lot of baggage, and it's used differently, and it's recently been. There's a retrieval process for the word too. What do you mean when you refer to queer?
I think this is a perfect spot to stop this and then turn and ask everybody to turn to their the person next to you, and when you hear, since this obviously this is going to be one of the controversial aspects of the book, is the title, right? Queer God. Can you just do me a favor and turn to the person next to you when you hear the words, when you hear queer put next to God, what do you think? What comes to mind? And then we'll share some of that. So take about maybe 2 or 3 minutes to do that. What do you hear?